HOA president fined me $675 for a perfect fence, then called the cops on us in our own driveway when we refused to pay. She smugly announced her law enforcement friends would handle it. I was ready to explode. But my wife? She just stood there with a calm, knowing smile. She wasn't worried at all. And by the end of this, you'll understand why Catherine Stone made the biggest mistake of her life. Looking back, I should have realized something was wrong with Catherine from the very beginning. The first time she introduced herself, she showed up at our door with a basket of artisanal cookies and that flawless suburban perfect smile. This was 18 months ago, right after Tracy and I moved into Meadowbrook Springs when she had been promoted to what I assumed was a bigger county role. I didn't know the details. Government work had always sounded to me like endless meetings and paperwork. But Tracy had seemed excited. I was too busy trying to establish my construction business to pay much attention. Bureaucracy wasn't my world. Building houses was. Our daughter Emma was thriving in her senior year, pulling top grades while preparing her Stanford application. With extracurriculars, volunteer hours, and an early decision deadline looming in November, she seemed poised to achieve everything we'd hoped for her. Tracy and I felt like we'd finally found our suburban paradise, a safe neighborhood, excellent schools, and friendly neighbors. And Catherine. She seemed like the jewel of this little world, always knowing everyone's names, organizing block events, and arriving with those expensive cookies for new families. Catherine had retired early from her real estate career. She explained to focus on community leadership. She mentioned casually that she had been unanimously elected HOA president. That should have been my first red flag. Nobody gets elected unanimously unless they're either adored or feared. She carried herself with a kind of polished confidence, always impeccably dressed, even when walking her dog. And when she visited our home, her eyes wandered just a bit too long over the layout, as if she was memorizing the floor plan. It felt less like small talk and more like reconnaissance. The first conflict came with a violation notice about our fence. It arrived one October morning, hand-delivered by Catherine herself, who looked like she'd just walked off a real estate billboard. She apologized profusely, holding a designer clipboard with professionally bound documents. "Brandon, I hate to be the bearer of this," she said, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "The board voted unanimously last night. Your fence extension violates Section 12.7. She handed me the papers with a perfectly manicured hand, quoting the fine of $500 while appearing regretful. The whole act was polished, like she'd performed it many times before. The fine didn't bother me as much as her presentation. Catherine seemed too professional, too rehearsed. She listed appeal procedures, offered compromise solutions, and even recommended which office to call. It felt like talking to a trained customer service agent, not a neighbor volunteering for an HOA. And yet, she remained unfailingly polite, almost gracious, as though fining me was a painful duty she carried out for the good of the community. Tracy's reaction surprised me even more. She listened calmly, her posture straight, her voice level. "I'll need 30 days to review this according to appeal procedures," she said, her tone clipped with quiet authority. I stared at my wife. This wasn't the woman who debated what to make for dinner. This was someone used to being listened to. Who was she at these county meetings? Catherine's expression flickered for the briefest moment, as though she was recalculating something before her polite mask returned. After Catherine left, Tracy pulled out official county letterhead to draft her response. I watched her write with precision, citing statutes and codes as if it were second nature. "Since when do you draft responses on county stationery at home?" I asked. She gave me a vague answer about proper formatting and protocols, but her confidence unsettled me. She sounded less like someone who attended meetings and more like someone who ran them. Emma came home that afternoon looking shaken. Word about our violation had already spread through her high school. "People are saying we're in trouble with the HOA," she said. By lunch, rumors had escalated into something bigger. Whispers that our family didn't respect community rules. Emma defended us, but she ended up in a heated argument with her classmates. Teachers noticed her distraction. For the first time, my daughter's spotless academic record showed cracks. How had news of a private notice traveled so quickly? That evening, while pulling into the driveway, I spotted Tracy's county-issued vehicle. On the dashboard was a permit that read executive staff parking. My stomach dropped. Executive staff? What did that even mean? The pieces weren't fitting together, and a cold dread started to build. The person I shared a life with felt like a stranger with a secret identity. When I asked her, she brushed it off, saying something about needing frequent access for coordination. Her explanation was vague, and suddenly her tailored suits, the business cards I'd never flipped over on her desk, and her phone calls that sounded more like briefings than chats, all took on a new weight. Meanwhile, Catherine wasn't subtle in hinting at escalation. I hope this doesn't need to go beyond the community level, she'd said with feigned concern. Things can get complicated once multiple governmental bodies get involved. Who talks like that over a fence dispute? And Tracy's response was equally cryptic. I've handled escalations before, Catherine. Trust me, they spoke like two generals testing each other's resolve. That night, I couldn't shake the unease. My wife, whom I thought simply attended county meetings, had staff, executive privileges, and the kind of confidence that made even Catherine hesitate. Catherine, who prided herself on research and control, had looked genuinely caught off guard by Tracy's calm authority. Something wasn't adding up. I watched Tracy pore over documents late into the evening, eyes sharp, hands steady. She wasn't just reading, she was strategizing. And for the first time, I asked myself the question that would haunt me. If my wife were just a county supervisor, why did she carry herself like someone much more powerful? And why, of all things, had Catherine Stone, the woman who seemed to know everything about everyone, looked so genuinely surprised when Tracy stood her ground? Tracy approached the HOA dispute with a kind of precision that I had never fully appreciated before. While I fumbled through the thick homeowner's agreement, trying to decipher Section 12.7, she was already buried in municipal databases, cross-referencing ordinance histories and procedural requirements as if she lived in that world daily. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating layers of government portals that I didn't even know existed. To her, the complex legal language seemed like second nature, like reading a recipe card. Watching her work made me realize there were parts of my wife's professional life I'd never taken the time to understand. 2 days later, help arrived in the form of Dave Mitchell. He showed up at our door carrying artisanal coffee and a sympathetic smile. Recently divorced, he'd moved into a rental 3 doors down about 6 months prior. There was a slightly desperate air about him, the kind of neediness you might expect from someone trying to rebuild their life. But he also radiated sincerity. I've been watching Catherine target newcomers for 2 years now, he said, spreading out a pile of documents across our kitchen table. You're not the first. She's been driving families out. I've been documenting everything, just waiting for someone willing to fight back. His preparation was meticulous. He produced violation timelines, photos, and escalation notes with a level of detail that made me wonder how much of his time was spent on this personal crusade. He seemed to know Catherine's entire routine. Property inspections every Tuesday morning, board meetings Thursday nights, violation notices Friday afternoons. He even predicted which types of infractions she would go after first. She always starts with fences and landscaping. He explained, it's visible. Once people are painted as problem residents, she escalates noise complaints, parking violations, whatever it takes to push them out. The specificity of his knowledge was both impressive and a little unsettling. He seemed like the ally we needed. But why was a man I barely knew so invested in our fight? Sure enough, Emma's troubles unfolded just as Dave predicted. Within 2 weeks, her perfect grades slipped. Her Stanford early decision application felt threatened, and her friends grew distant. Teachers mentioned concern over her focus. She even had a panic attack during a prep session when her counselors suggested backup schools. It was as if the social fabric around her had been rewoven overnight to isolate her. I couldn't shake the sense that Catherine had designed it that way. Emma's counselor, Mrs. Jennifer Harrison, seemed overly invested. She scheduled extra meetings asking probing questions about our family routines, financial stability, and even Tracy's county job. At first, it came off as concern, but her curiosity felt unusually sharp. When I mentioned it to Dave, he frowned. School counselors have access to county databases, he said. If she's sharing that information with Catherine, it would explain how your private matters are reaching the HOA. His warning planted seeds of paranoia I hadn't considered. Meanwhile, Tracy made a phone call that changed everything. Time for full disclosure, she said into the receiver, her tone commanding. Yes, I'm certain about the timeline. Coordinate across departments for public presentation. Her words carried the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders, not requesting favors. When I asked afterward, she brushed me off with jargon about interdepartmental coordination and budget cycles. Still, I couldn't ignore how naturally she spoke the language of power. Catherine's second visit confirmed the escalation. She arrived with another stack of documents, this time far more aggressive. Her tone stayed polite, but the materials looked like they had been prepared by legal counsel. I really hope we could settle this quietly, she said. But the board insists on strict enforcement. Her binder included case precedents, escalation protocols, and statutory citations. This was no longer a friendly warning. It was a legal offensive. Even stranger was how quickly Catherine seemed to know our countermeasures. Hours after Tracy filed an appeal, Catherine referenced it in casual conversation. She hinted at our legal strategies as though she'd been in the room when we discussed them. Dave's frustration matched mine. Someone is feeding her information, he said flatly. With that kind of access, it has to be someone tied to county systems. He encouraged us to tighten our circle and share fewer details. Ironically, he wanted more access himself, claiming it was the only way he could strategize on our behalf. His advice leaned heavily toward escalation. Don't just file appeals. Go public. File simultaneous complaints with multiple agencies. Make this about accountability. He spoke like someone familiar with politics, not just neighborhood disputes. At the time, I was grateful. He sounded like the ally we needed when most neighbors avoided us out of fear of Catherine. Then Dave proposed a trap. Plant false information and see how quickly it reached Catherine. Tell Emma you're thinking about moving, he suggested. Keep it within the family. If Catherine brings it up, we'll know exactly how the leak works. His idea was clever, too clever. It felt like something from a spy novel, not a neighborhood dispute. But I was so desperate for an ally, I ignored the knot in my stomach. The next day, Catherine stopped me while I was getting the mail. Hearing you might be leaving us soon, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. The trap had worked, and the only person who knew was Dave. Meanwhile, my business began to suffer. 2 clients canceled contracts after hearing whispers about my HOA troubles. Rumors in the construction community spread faster than seemed natural, costing me thousands in lost revenue. Catherine's $500 fine had snowballed into something that threatened my livelihood. Dave expressed outrage, offering to vouch for me professionally. I'll testify to your family's integrity, he said. His loyalty felt reassuring even as our situation deteriorated. But then he mentioned something odd. Ran into Catherine at the county building, he said casually. She was asking about filing procedures. My gut twisted. Why would Catherine be at the county offices? And why did Dave sound like it was no big deal? Tracy noticed my unease, but didn't comment. She just kept working late into the night, her desk littered with statutes, filings, and official documents that I now realize she handled with expert familiarity. Watching her, I couldn't help but think my wife wasn't just playing defense. She was preparing for a larger war, one Catherine didn't even realize she'd started. Catherine's community standards and safety meeting looked less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a corporate presentation. The community center had been transformed into a professional space with charts, photographs of violations, and property value projections. Though she never mentioned our family by name, the implication was unmistakable. Photos of our fence loomed large on the projector, framed to appear ominous. Data, charts, and carefully worded warnings suggested that property values would plummet if non-compliance patterns weren't addressed. It was calculated intimidation, presented with the polish of a political campaign. The room split almost immediately. Older residents worried about stability and property value nodded along with Catherine's pitch. Newer families, especially those who had already felt her enforcement tactics, shifted uncomfortably. At first, it seemed Catherine had the upper hand. But then Dave stood up. Positioned near the front row, he spoke with fiery conviction. This isn't about community protection. This is targeted harassment. His passionate words swayed a few undecided neighbors. Though I noticed something troubling. His choice of words amplified the drama, making our situation sound worse rather than better. After the meeting, I realized Dave had revealed details no one outside our family should have known. He talked about how we were considering moving, a lie we had planted deliberately. Somehow, in defending us, he had given Catherine exactly what she needed, proof to frame us as disruptive. Neutral neighbors began to whisper. Where there was smoke, they assumed there must be fire. Meanwhile, Emma's crisis deepened. With Mrs. Harrison suddenly on leave for a family emergency in Florida, she lost her main advocate at school. Substitute counselors didn't have the same rapport, and Emma spiraled further. Her grades dipped, her Stanford essay faltered, and she confessed she was considering dropping advanced placement classes. I wanted to shield her, but the campaign against us had woven itself so tightly into our lives that even her future was being strangled. At home, Tracy continued balancing county work with our defense. She missed part of the meeting that night for what she called urgent county business. When she returned, she carried herself with the same composure I had seen before, calm, steady, as though this storm was familiar. During a break, she mentioned casually that her staff had called about an important budget vote. I froze. Staff. Budget votes. These weren't tasks for a minor official. My wife wasn't just participating, she was orchestrating. Catherine's momentum grew when she began a petition drive. She branded it concerned residents for community standards, carefully worded to appeal to people's financial self-interest rather than personal grudges. 30 signatures appeared almost overnight. The document demanded accountability from families refusing cooperation. Everyone knew who the target was, but the wording was vague enough to shield Catherine from liability. Watching her maneuver made one thing clear. This wasn't just about fences or lawns. She was building a political case. Tracy, though, wasn't cowed. Her ability to navigate pressure amazed me. When a neighbor asked about her specific responsibilities, she answered with bureaucratic precision. I coordinate interdepartmental policy and resource allocation. It was vague yet powerful enough to leave an impression. People recognized authority even if they didn't understand its scope. For the first time, I saw cracks in Catherine's confidence. Her eyes narrowed. Her smile faltered. She wasn't sure anymore who she was really up against. The highlight of the meeting came when Catherine hinted at law enforcement support. Our compliance is backed by connections in law enforcement, she said, her tone designed to intimidate. She didn't have to say more. The threat was clear. Comply or the sheriff might come knocking. Whispers rippled through the audience, fear mixing with resignation. But then Tracy spoke. Law enforcement connections can be unpredictable, she said evenly, a small smile tugging at her lips. Sometimes you think you know the hierarchy, and then you discover things aren't what they seem. Her tone carried hidden weight, as if she knew something Catherine didn't. Even I was unsettled by her calm certainty. Catherine blinked, her composure slipping just long enough to reveal uncertainty. For the first time, it was Catherine who seemed unsure. As the meeting adjourned, I overheard two neighbors whispering. Did you see how that county supervisor handled Catherine? One said. She wasn't afraid at all. She knew something we don't. The words lingered in my head. County supervisor. That was what people thought Tracy was. But the way others deferred to her, the investigators, the deputy, even Catherine suggested something far greater. When we got home, the weight of it all pressed down on me. My business was collapsing. 2 more clients had withdrawn because they didn't want to be associated with legal troubles. Emma was unraveling under the pressure. Neighbors we'd once called friends now avoided eye contact. And yet, in the middle of all that, Tracy was steady, composed, almost serene. It was like she'd been through worse storms before. I finally asked her, how do you stay so calm? Catherine is threatening police action. The whole community is against us. Emma's falling apart. And you sit here reviewing documents like you've already won. Tracy looked up from her papers, her eyes sharp but gentle. Because I know something Catherine doesn't, she said. She didn't elaborate. And maybe she didn't need to. In that moment, I realized the war wasn't just about Catherine's obsession with control. It was about secrets my wife carried, ones that even I hadn't uncovered yet. The stage was set. Catherine thought she was winning. Dave appeared to be our most loyal ally. Emma was under siege. My business was on the verge of collapse. And Tracy, she sat in the middle of the storm, calm and resolute, preparing for a counterstrike Catherine could never anticipate. Tracy's counteroffensive was a thing of bureaucratic beauty that made me realize I'd seriously underestimated my wife's governmental expertise. She filed comprehensive complaints with the State Ethics Board, Code Compliance Division, and Consumer Protection Agency with the systematic precision of someone who understood exactly which agencies had jurisdiction over HOA misconduct and how to present evidence for maximum impact. Her documentation was professionally formatted, legally precise, and strategically targeted to trigger multiple simultaneous investigations that would overwhelm Catherine's volunteer resources. Watching her navigate complex procedural requirements and regulatory frameworks with insider knowledge was like discovering she'd been speaking a foreign language fluently while I assumed she was still learning basic vocabulary. Her complaint filings referenced specific statutes, included properly indexed evidence, and demonstrated familiarity with governmental processes that suggested extensive experience rather than casual participation. The information leaks continued with disturbing precision that confirmed someone with direct access to our planning discussions was feeding Catherine real-time intelligence about our defensive strategies. Despite limiting our conversations to private family meetings at home, Catherine somehow knew about Tracy's ethics board filing before the investigator called to schedule our interview. She referenced our legal strategy during casual neighborhood encounters, anticipated our procedural moves with uncanny accuracy, and demonstrated knowledge of our timeline and tactics that could only come from someone present during our planning sessions. Dave expressed appropriate frustration about the security breach, while offering increasingly specific advice about strategic coordination. Someone with county access is definitely feeding her information, he said, suggesting we share detailed information about Tracy's work schedule and meeting availability so we could plan a better strategy around her professional obligations. Dave's eagerness to know specifics about Tracy's professional schedule struck me as helpful tactical planning rather than suspicious intelligence gathering. He recommended we coordinate our legal filings with Tracy's county commitments to avoid scheduling conflicts, suggested timing our public statements around her department meetings for maximum impact, and offered to handle community outreach during her busy periods. His questions about Tracy's exact responsibilities and authority levels seemed strategically motivated. If we know her precise availability and departmental connections, we can plan more sophisticated responses, he explained, pushing for detailed information about her daily schedule, meeting obligations, and interdepartmental relationships that would optimize our tactical coordination. The trap we set to identify our intelligence leak worked with devastating clarity that confirmed my suspicions about the source of Catherine's inside information. We shared false information about considering relocation due to harassment pressure, limiting the conversation to our kitchen table during family dinner, and specifically mentioning our fictional timeline for house hunting in neighboring communities. Dave was present for coffee earlier that day when we discussed feeling overwhelmed by the conflict. And I mentioned our family's private conversation about potentially moving if the pressure continued escalating. Within 24 hours, Catherine casually hinted, hearing you could be leaving soon, during a block encounter, proving that details discussed with Dave were reaching her quicker than natural gossip ever could. My conviction about the leak pathway seemed ironclad. Information went from our private family discussions to Dave through his helpful presence during our planning sessions, then from Dave to Catherine through whatever coordination system they had established. Dave's angry support when confronted about the timing seemed genuine, expressing outrage that someone would betray our trust during such a vulnerable period. "I can't believe anyone would use your private family conversations against you," he said, maintaining his facade of loyalty while suggesting we needed better operational security going forward. His interpretation that Tracy was protecting herself legally by remaining skeptical of obvious conclusions felt reasonable given the potential professional consequences of making unfounded accusations against community leaders or school officials. Tracy's answer to the proven intelligence leak was advanced beyond anything I'd linked with county meeting attendance involving state review boards, internal audit demands, and cross-department reviews that show deep mastery of accountability mechanisms. She filed complaints with agencies I'd never heard of, referenced regulatory frameworks that required specialized expertise to navigate, and initiated procedural reviews that suggested authority to trigger comprehensive investigations. Her ability to coordinate multiple bureaucratic responses simultaneously indicated familiarity with complex governmental systems that went far beyond administrative participation. The professional quality of her documentation and the deference shown by investigating agencies suggested she occupied a position of significantly more importance than I'd understood. My construction business collapsed with frightening speed as word spread through the industry about our involvement in legal conflicts with community authorities and governmental agencies. Another significant client terminated our contract after hearing about neighborhood conflict, and multiple prospects collapsed when builders feared disputes could disrupt schedules or community relations. The financial pressure mounted exponentially, turning Catherine's original $500 fine into thousands of dollars in lost revenue, legal expenses, and business reputation damage. Dave offered to supply character references and vouched for our family's integrity to potential clients, though his efforts failed to offset the systematic harm to our professional reputation across the local construction field. Emma's academic crisis reached a breaking point that threatened everything she'd worked toward during her high school career. She lost her honor roll standing for the first time in her academic life, her scores slipping to levels that made her dream of Stanford early admission increasingly impossible. The stress manifested in panic attacks during standardized testing sessions, social isolation from former friends who distanced themselves from our family's controversy, and serious consideration of withdrawing her Stanford application entirely. Her substitute counselor recommended reducing her course load until our family situation stabilized, effectively derailing her college preparation during the most crucial semester of her senior year. The systematic destruction of her academic and social environment felt like calculated psychological warfare designed to pressure families into compliance through their children's futures. Tracy's reaction to our evidence about the intelligence leak was unexpectedly skeptical, warning me to be very careful about assumptions and reminding me that things aren't always what they appear to be on the surface. Her caution felt like legal self-protection rather than genuine doubt about our conclusions, especially given the professional consequences she might face if we made unfounded accusations against community leaders or school officials. Dave interpreted her hesitation as appropriate prudence from someone whose county position required careful documentation before making serious allegations. She can't accuse anyone without bulletproof evidence, he explained, suggesting we needed more comprehensive proof before Tracy could safely support our conclusions about the leak source and coordination mechanisms. Catherine's escalation took the form of a certified letter that represented a significant shift from community pressure to legal intimidation, with the potential for serious financial consequences. Instead of another house visit, she sent professionally drafted documentation outlining lien procedures, legal precedents for enforcement, and timeline requirements for compliance that suggested consultation with legal counsel rather than volunteer HOA guidance. The letter cited numerous statutes, contained legal citations, and described escalation steps with the detail of someone assembling a full lawsuit rather than handling a neighborhood issue. Her shift to formal legal processes indicated confidence in her position and access to professional resources that went beyond typical volunteer organization capabilities. Tracy's response to Catherine's legal escalation carried the same enigmatic confidence that had puzzled everyone during the community meeting, suggesting knowledge about power dynamics and procedural outcomes that the rest of us lacked. Yes, Catherine, I agree. This should end soon. she said with a slight smile that seemed to contain inside information about approaching developments. Very soon indeed. Her tone suggested anticipation of events that would resolve our situation in ways Catherine hadn't anticipated, though she remained characteristically vague about the specific mechanisms or timeline involved. The quiet certainty in her voice felt like someone counting down to a predetermined outcome rather than hoping for favorable circumstances. The State Ethics Board investigators arrived with the kind of professional gravitas that transformed our suburban dispute into something resembling a federal case. Multiple serious-looking officials with clipboards, recording devices, and the systematic efficiency of people accustomed to investigating misconduct by public officials created an atmosphere of formal accountability that made Catherine's volunteer HOA leadership seem suddenly insignificant. Their presence legitimized our complaints in ways I hadn't expected, treating the harassment of county employees as a matter requiring state-level oversight rather than local community resolution. The lead investigator addressed Tracy with unusual deference throughout the preliminary interview, calling her Commissioner Phillips in a tone that suggested recognition of authority rather than mere courtesy. I assumed it was standard respectful protocol for addressing county employees during official proceedings. The investigators' conduct toward Tracy puzzled me during the 6-week probe, as they consistently treated her like someone whose time was scarce and whose cooperation was respected rather than demanded. They scheduled interviews around her availability, deferred to her scheduling preferences, and asked permission before recording conversations in ways that seemed unnecessarily accommodating for someone providing victim testimony. When the lead investigator addressed her as Commissioner Phillips during our joint interview, I thought it was simply professional courtesy until I noticed the junior investigators taking detailed notes whenever she spoke. Their body language suggested they were documenting statements from someone whose words carried weight in governmental circles, though I attributed this to her county employment rather than any specific position or authority. My confusion deepened during a chance encounter at the grocery store when Deputy Walker recognized Tracy and acted with the kind of respectful formality usually reserved for judges or elected officials. "Good morning, Commissioner," he said with genuine deference, tipping his hat slightly while maintaining professional distance. "Hope you're having a good day and that county business is treating you well." Tracy responded with the easy familiarity of someone accustomed to such recognition, thanking him for his service and mentioning budget considerations in passing. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but the deputy's respectful demeanor suggested he knew exactly who Tracy was and why her opinion mattered to his department's operations. Dave continued demonstrating unwavering loyalty throughout the investigation period, offering to testify about Tracy's professional character and our family's integrity during what he described as systematic persecution by community extremists. His support felt genuine and desperately needed as other neighbors maintained a careful distance from our family to avoid association with ongoing legal proceedings. Dave volunteered to research county organizational charts to help us understand Tracy's position and leverage her governmental knowledge more effectively. If we better understand the bureaucratic structure and chain of command, we can present your case more persuasively, he explained, showing unusual initiative for someone supposedly just offering neighborly support during a difficult period. Mrs. Harrison returned from Florida completely unaware of the accusations and shocked to learn that anyone had considered her behavior suspicious or inappropriate. Her boarding pass, hotel receipts, and hospital visit records for her mother's cancer treatment provided ironclad documentation that her absence was planned weeks in advance and completely unrelated to our HOA situation. She expressed genuine concern about Emma's academic decline and offered additional counseling support to help her recover from the stress-related performance issues. "I was simply doing my job, caring about Emma's well-being," she said with obvious hurt that anyone would question her professional integrity. "I never meant for my thorough documentation to seem intrusive or inappropriate." Her vindication felt simultaneously relieving and embarrassing given how convinced I'd been of her involvement. The investigation proceeded with bureaucratic thoroughness that impressed me with its systematic approach to documenting Catherine's harassment patterns and procedural violations. Investigators interviewed neighbors, reviewed HOA documentation, analyzed financial records, and compiled evidence with the methodical precision of people building comprehensive cases for potential prosecution. Their 6-week timeline reflected the seriousness with which state agencies approached misconduct allegations involving public officials treating our situation as more than a neighborhood dispute requiring mediation. The professional quality of their documentation and the scope of their investigation suggested they were preparing materials for potential legal action rather than simply fact-finding for administrative resolution. Catherine's overconfidence during her investigator interview revealed how completely she'd misunderstood the situation she'd created for herself. She told investigators with absolute certainty that Tracy was a low-level county employee attempting to abuse a minor administrative position to avoid legitimate community obligations. Her dismissive characterization of Tracy as some kind of clerk or coordinator demonstrated the thoroughness of her research blind spot regarding the actual governmental structure and authority relationships. Catherine spoke with the condescending confidence of someone explaining obvious facts to investigators who seemed confused about basic jurisdictional issues. Her certainty about Tracy's insignificant position in county government became a central element of her defense strategy. The investigators' puzzled reaction to Catherine's description of Tracy's role was the first clear indication that something fundamental was wrong with our understanding of the situation. They exchanged confused glances when Catherine confidently described Tracy as a low-level administrative employee, asked clarifying questions about exactly what county role she believed Tracy held, and seemed genuinely bewildered by the disconnect between Catherine's assumptions and their knowledge of governmental structure. "Ma'am, could you clarify exactly what county position you believe she occupies?" the lead investigator asked with barely concealed confusion. Catherine's detailed explanation about clerks and coordinators trying to seem important only deepened their puzzled expressions. I overheard a fragment of a conversation between investigators that should have clarified everything if I'd been paying closer attention to the implications of their words. "Wait, she doesn't know the commission chair lives here?" one investigator whispered to another during a break in Catherine's interview. "How do you research someone this thoroughly and miss that detail?" "Commission chair." I assume they were discussing some other county officials' involvement in reviewing our case. Perhaps someone Tracy had contacted for procedural guidance. The significance of their confusion about Catherine's ignorance didn't register with me at the time, though it should have been the missing piece that explained everything about Tracy's confidence and authority. Tracy made her final decisive phone call that evening with the authoritative tone of someone coordinating significant governmental resources rather than requesting assistance from supervisors or colleagues. "Time for full disclosure," she said with complete confidence in her ability to control upcoming events. "Yes, I'm certain about the timeline and approach. Coordinate with all departments for a comprehensive public presentation." Her language suggested command authority over interdepartmental coordination and resource allocation that went far beyond meeting attendance or advisory participation. The call lasted 20 minutes and involved a detailed discussion of procedures, jurisdictions, and coordination mechanisms that sounded more like executive planning than administrative consultation. Sheriff Williams scheduled a public hearing to resolve the ongoing situation involving a county official and community conflict. Language that made our neighborhood dispute sound like a matter of governmental importance rather than suburban petty politics. The formal notification arrived on official county letterhead announcing proceedings in the main municipal auditorium with media notification and attendance by relevant county officials. Dave immediately volunteered to handle media outreach for our side, claiming connections with local news outlets that could ensure better coverage of the hearing. "I have relationships with reporters who understand community justice issues," he offered with enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "We could get coverage that frames this properly instead of letting Catherine control the narrative." His eagerness to manage public communications struck me as strategic thinking rather than suspicious behavior. Dave's final positioning before the hearing involved taking detailed notes during all our preparatory meetings and volunteering to serve as our primary community liaison for coordinating neighborhood support. He offered to contact sympathetic residents, organize character witnesses, and ensure maximum turnout for the public hearing. His questions about Tracy's exact authority and commission procedures became increasingly specific as the hearing approached. Do commission chairs have executive authority over department decisions? He asked. Can they override budget allocations or personnel choices? I want to understand the full scope of what Catherine is challenging. His interest in governmental structure seemed tactically motivated, helping us understand the political dimensions of our conflict rather than gathering intelligence for opposing forces. Sheriff Williams's investigation had documented Catherine's systematic harassment pattern targeting county employees' families, presenting evidence of coordinated campaigns designed to pressure public servants through their personal lives and residential situations. The professional presentation included timeline analysis, communication evidence, and testimony from previous victims who'd experienced similar treatment from HOA leadership under Catherine's direction. 3 other families had been driven from the community through escalating violation notices, social isolation campaigns, and financial pressure tactics that forced relocation when residents couldn't sustain the ongoing conflict. Catherine's methods showed a sophisticated understanding of psychological pressure and community dynamics that suggested experience beyond typical volunteer leadership. Tracy's preparation for the public hearing involved a complete transformation from suburban wife and mother into the kind of authority figure I occasionally glimpsed during her work calls, but never fully appreciated. Her professional business suit, comprehensive official documentation, and commanding presence reminded me that I'd been living with someone whose daily responsibilities involved significantly more authority than I'd understood. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to public scrutiny in formal proceedings, reviewing legal documents with expertise that suggested extensive experience rather than recent training. Her ability to navigate complex governmental procedures and coordinate interdepartmental responses indicated familiarity with executive functions that went far beyond administrative participation in county operations. The business card discovery happened accidentally while I was looking for contact information to coordinate with our attorney scattered across Tracy's home office desk, where they had apparently been sitting face up for months, while I had never paid attention to the details. I froze. The card wasn't for Tracy Phillips, County Supervisor. It read, Tracy Phillips Carter, County Commission Chair. Chair. The word echoed in my mind. She didn't just attend meetings. She ran them. She oversaw the entire county, every department, including the sheriff's. The world tilted on its axis. Catherine hadn't picked a fight with a clerk. She declared war on the mayor. Dave was present when I made the discovery, expressing appropriate amazement at the revelation. Commission Chair. That explains your confidence throughout this entire mess, he said, maintaining his supportive facade while asking increasingly detailed questions about commission authority and governmental structure. Catherine never knew she was targeting the person who oversees county operations and policy development. My shock at discovering Tracy's actual position felt like learning I'd been married to a celebrity without recognizing her fame. Commission Chair meant she was an elected official responsible for county policy, budget oversight, and interdepartmental coordination. Essentially, the chief executive of local government operations. Her casual references to staff, budget votes, and departmental meetings suddenly made perfect sense, as did the respectful treatment from investigators, deputies, and other county employees who had recognized her authority while I remained oblivious. I wondered when you'd finally noticed the letterhead on my office documents, Tracy said with amusement at my belated recognition. The business cards have been sitting there since we moved in, but you never seemed interested in the details of county government structure. Dave's reaction to the commission chair's revelation seemed genuinely humble and appropriately impressed by the scope of authority Catherine had unknowingly challenged. No wonder you've been so calm about this entire situation, he said, asking specific questions about commission procedures and executive authority that seemed motivated by curiosity about governmental operations rather than intelligence gathering. Catherine picked the wrong target entirely. She's been trying to intimidate the person who literally oversees the departments she's threatening to involve. His questions about whether commission chairs could override departmental decisions or influence law enforcement policies seemed like a natural interest in understanding the political dynamics of our situation rather than suspicious probing for tactical intelligence. Community preparation for the public hearing reached fever pitch as residents chose sides between supporting Catherine's community standards enforcement and questioning her methods against county leadership. The media notification attracted attention beyond our neighborhood, with local reporters covering the story as a case study in HOA overreach and governmental accountability. Dave coordinated our supporter outreach with impressive efficiency, contacting sympathetic neighbors and organizing character witnesses who could testify about our family's positive contributions to community life. His networking skills and political instincts proved invaluable for building coalition support during the final preparations, though his eagerness to control communications and coordinate strategy continued striking me as unusually sophisticated for neighborly assistance. Catherine's research limitation finally made sense when Tracy explained the name discrepancy that had enabled our opponent's fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Catherine had researched property records showing Tracy Phillips, while Tracy's professional and campaign materials used her hyphenated married name Tracy Phillips Carter for political purposes. Commission chair positions weren't listed in basic property databases, and Catherine's real estate background focused on ownership research rather than political office databases. Her thorough investigation of our family had missed the single most important detail that would have completely changed her strategic approach to neighborhood enforcement. The irony was devastating. Catherine's professional confidence had been undermined by the same attention to detail that made her effective at harassment campaigns. The county auditorium was packed beyond capacity with community members, county officials, and local media representatives who'd transformed our neighborhood dispute into a public spectacle of governmental accountability and community standards enforcement. Catherine had orchestrated maximum attendance through her petition campaign and community outreach. Confident that public scrutiny would expose Tracy's alleged corruption and vindicate her enforcement methods, Dave positioned himself prominently in the front row with our family, taking detailed notes and displaying unwavering support that influenced several residents who respected his apparent dedication to justice. The formal proceedings attracted attention far beyond Meadowbrook Springs, with reporters covering the story as a case study in HOA overreach and the intersection of community governance with county administration. The atmosphere felt more like a political trial than a neighborhood hearing, with clear battle lines drawn between Catherine's supporters and our scattered allies. Catherine's presentation was a masterpiece of sophisticated argumentation that would have impressed political consultants and legal professionals. She prepared professionally bound documentation, statistical analyses, and precedent cases that painted Tracy as a corrupt politician abusing governmental position to avoid legitimate community obligations. Her argument was methodical and compelling, referencing multiple ordinances, constitutional principles, and governmental accountability standards with the precision of someone who'd consulted legal counsel extensively. We cannot allow public officials to believe their positions exempt them from the same community standards that govern every other resident. She declared with righteous conviction that resonated with citizens concerned about governmental overreach and political privilege. Her presentation included timeline evidence, financial analysis, and testimonial support that created a comprehensive case for official misconduct, requiring immediate investigation and resolution. Dave's public testimony defending our family was passionate and articulate, emphasizing Tracy's professionalism and our dignity throughout the systematic harassment campaign Catherine had orchestrated. "I've witnessed how appropriately Commissioner Phillips has handled this persecution," he said, his voice carrying conviction that influenced undecided residents. "Never once has she acted inappropriately or abused any governmental authority. This family has endured months of targeted harassment with grace and integrity that reflects their character." His defense touched on our positive contributions to community life, Tracy's professional confidence, and the disproportionate response to minor procedural disputes. Several neighbors nodded appreciatively at his advocacy, apparently convinced by his passionate support and detailed knowledge of our situation throughout the prolonged conflict. During the hearing's first recess, I stepped outside for air and accidentally discovered the truth that shattered everything I'd believed about our neighborhood ally and supporter. Dave stood behind the auditorium building, talking quietly on his phone, apparently assuming privacy while conducting what sounded like a coordination call with someone on the other end. Yes, Catherine. The misdirection worked perfectly, he said with satisfaction that made my blood freeze. Mrs. Harrison, she's been in Florida caring for her sick mother for 3 weeks. She had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. The fake information about the family relocating worked exactly as planned. They completely bought that she was the leak source. His tone carried the casual confidence of someone reporting successful mission completion rather than betraying friends who trusted him completely. My devastating realization that Dave had been Catherine's paid informant from the beginning felt like discovering that gravity worked in reverse. Everything I believed about our situation was fundamentally wrong. Dave continued his conversation with increasing detail about his intelligence gathering and coordination efforts. Look, I never expected the target to be county commission chair. He admitted with concern that suggested Catherine's reaction wasn't entirely positive. I thought she was just some low-level administrator, like you said, but my intelligence was solid. Helped you plan everything perfectly from the beginning. The depth of his betrayal was staggering, involving months of careful manipulation, false friendship, and systematic information gathering while maintaining a facade of loyal support throughout our family's crisis. When I confronted Dave immediately after overhearing his phone conversation, he dropped all pretense of friendship and revealed the ugly motivations behind his months of careful deception. $8,000, he spat, all pretense of friendship gone. That's what your perfect little life was worth to me. You had everything I lost. So yes, I sold you out. The best part? Catherine thought she was bullying some paper-pushing clerk. I never told her the truth. I got paid either way. His justification was pathetic and revealing, exposing deep personal resentment that made our family's happiness a target for his financial desperation. Dave continued his confession. I told Catherine what she wanted to hear, that Tracy was some minor county employee, he confessed. I never corrected her assumptions because that would have ended my paycheck. His deception was multi-layered. He betrayed our family's trust while lying to his employer about the true scope of Tracy's authority. The irony was perfect. Dave had been paid to spy on the county commission chair while assuring Catherine she was targeting a powerless bureaucrat. His greed created the exact conditions for her spectacular miscalculation, guaranteeing consequences he never anticipated for both his victims and his employer. The climax came when Sheriff Williams addressed the formal resolution of harassment allegations and the next steps for interdepartmental coordination. Commissioner Phillips, he said with a respectful formality owed to county leadership, we have documented evidence of systematic harassment of public officials, filing false reports, and conspiracy to defraud community residents. I request your input on interdepartmental coordination before proceeding with a referral to the district attorney. His language was carefully professional, recognizing Tracy's authority over county policy while maintaining law enforcement independence. The formal acknowledgement of her position sent shockwaves through the room as Catherine's supporters realized they had been championing harassment of the person who oversaw county operations and budget allocation. Catherine's world collapsed in real time as she finally grasped the magnitude of her mistake and the identity of her target. Commission chair? What are you talking about? Chair of what commission? She stammered, her confident facade crumbling. Months of planning and community organizing had been built on ignorance about government structure and Tracy's actual role. Dave, you said she was just some county clerk, she cried, grasping how completely her paid informant's calculated omissions had misled her. The public nature of her humiliation was brutal, with community members and media witnesses documenting her recognition that she had orchestrated systematic harassment of county leadership. Tracy's response to Sheriff Williams' request displayed the executive authority that had long puzzled me. I recommend full coordination with all affected departments and immediate referral to the district attorney, she said, her presence commanding the auditorium. This behavior threatens public officials' ability to serve and requires a comprehensive investigation to prevent future incidents. The transformation from neighborhood harassment victim to governing executive was complete, revealing the person I had married without fully understanding her professional significance or political authority. The district attorney's immediate acceptance confirmed the seriousness of Catherine's legal exposure and the institutional support Tracy commanded. "We will file charges within 48 hours," the office announced, treating harassment of county leadership as a priority case. Catherine's petition backers began retreating, recognizing they had endorsed persecution of elected officials responsible for county operations countywide. Dave's duplicity stood exposed. The perfect reversal was complete. Catherine had called the police to force compliance from someone she believed was a powerless county clerk, only to discover she'd been systematically harassing the person who chairs the body overseeing law enforcement policy, budget allocation, and interdepartmental coordination. Her confidence in law enforcement support evaporated as she realized that the very officials she'd expected to intimidate us actually reported to the person she'd been targeting. The irony was devastating and absolute. Every threat she'd made, every enforcement mechanism she'd referenced, every governmental authority she'd claimed was ultimately controlled by the woman she'd been trying to intimidate into submission. The digital evidence trail exposed Dave's betrayal with forensic precision. Venmo payments totaling $8,000 over 6 months were labeled landscape consulting, creating a financial paper trail that proved systematic compensation for intelligence rather than neighborly help. Cell tower data placed him at Catherine's house during critical planning, and metadata from photos he provided confirmed real-time coordination. His county IT contractor logs revealed when he accessed filing systems and cross-referenced our submissions with Catherine's timeline, showing how he funneled information. Mrs. Harrison's vindication came with clear documentation, boarding passes, hotel receipts, and hospital records proving her Florida trip for her mother's cancer treatment had been planned weeks earlier. She returned, shocked that anyone doubted her. "I was just doing my job, caring about Emma's well-being," she said with dignity that made our suspicions feel unfair. Dave's downfall was swift. Arrested on conspiracy and bribery charges, his IT contract was terminated immediately. Legal fees and job loss led to foreclosure within months, and the community cut him off completely. Catherine had paid him for information, but his lies to both sides created the disaster that consumed them. Catherine's humiliation matched her campaign of intimidation. The court sentenced her to community service, maintaining the same public properties she had weaponized. She wrote public apologies and paid restitution for fraudulent fines and legal costs. Her standing collapsed. Neighbors abandoned her, and she moved to another county to start over. The community organized a fund to support Mrs. Harrison's family during her mother's treatment, a gesture of remorse that raised over $5,000. It also helped Emma recover academically with tutoring and counseling. Harrison's graciousness showed the character that had been wrongly questioned. The HOA itself was dismantled and rebuilt with safeguards against abuse, transparent elections, mandatory audits, external mediation for disputes, and rotating oversight committees. Rules now demanded documented justification for violations and open access to records. Residents chose transparency over intimidation, and property values rose as confidence returned. Emma bounced back stronger, rewriting her Stanford essay about resilience under harassment. Admissions officers praised her maturity, and she regained honor roll standing. The ordeal fueled her interest in pre-law studies, turning trauma into purpose. My construction business recovered too. Clients returned once the truth spread, and new ones arrived, impressed by our refusal to yield to corruption. Reputation damage turned into credibility. Contracts exceeded what I'd lost. Fighting Catherine had cost us dearly, but standing firm paid off. Tracy used the experience to launch a county-wide HOA abuse prevention program. It trained law enforcement to recognize overreach, provided resources for families, and created oversight systems that flagged patterns early. Within the first year, a dozen families avoided what we endured. Annual neighborhood events now honor Mrs. Harrison and remind us to support families in crisis rather than isolate them. Dave's old house was sold to a quiet family who never once faced a violation. Catherine's original fence complaint was declared invalid. Her rule change had violated county governance requirements. The irony sealed her defeat. 6 months later, a reporter called, "Can you comment on Catherine Stone suing Dave Mitchell for fraud and breach of contract?" I burst out laughing. Even in exile, Catherine was still picking the wrong fights. If this story taught you anything, drop it in the comments. Sometimes the person you battle has far more power than you know, and sometimes your closest ally is actually your worst enemy.